Let's speak to Harjap S Bhangal, who's a UK immigration lawyer. Harjap, I don't think anybody thinks these figures are remotely surprising. Those of us who have looked at migrationary figures over the past few years knew how high they were. I didn't realise it was going to put us top of the charts amongst developed nations, but again, that doesn't particularly surprise me. But is there a way to sort of reverse this policy? As someone who is an immigration lawyer, you must deal a lot of times with families who want to stay here, want to carry on working, have a UK visa. They've put their child in the school system, for example, and don't really want to end up disrupting that child's life and going back home.
Well, if we could look at the health and care sector, and then we say, right, what are we asking these workers to do? We're asking them to come and look after our family members, which we can't look after or won't look after ourselves in their old age or in their illnesses. Now then to say to someone, right, you can look after my mum and dad, or you're expected to, but you can't bring your children over or your spouse, seems a little bit unfair. The bulk of these people were coming over as family members. That has been stopped now because care workers are no longer allowed to bring their spouse or their dependents' kids over anymore. The same goes with students. Students can't do that either. And remember, this mass of these people who were allowed to come here was under the last government, with the famous 745,000 work permits or figures that were granted by Rishi Sunak to companies to allow to sponsor foreign workers. The problem lies in filling these vacancies, as you mentioned earlier, with British workers. Now, why can't British people train as care workers? Why can't they train as, let's say, lorry drivers, where there's another big shortage? Why can't they become waitresses or work in the hospitality industry? We see pubs closing, complaining that they can't get the staff. Factory workers, farmers, why can't they do that? There seems to be a massive gap in that, and that needs to be addressed with the skills, maybe the welfare sector, in relation to that. And we need to encourage our people, the British people, look, to get up there and fill these positions. If we're not willing to fill these positions, then do we have a right to moan about people who are willing to do so?
But you know, you say that, but I think what's happened, it's interesting, you mentioned lorry drivers, and so I know a thing or two about this because my dad was a lorry driver, and what he found, and this is just, you know, one woman's experience of her own upbringing, what he found was as soon as we had the A7 group of nations come and join the EU, part of free movement, it was more appealing to the big haulage companies and transporter companies to employ people from, say, Poland or the Czech Republic because they cost less money. And they also didn't have to pass all of the same tests that UK lorry drivers are put under, whether it comes to, you know, proving that you've got various HGV licences for various different categories, medical checks and so on and so forth. All of a sudden their licences were just applicable here when they could probably just pay a tenner to get them over there. And his wages just kept going down. Huge sections of the workforce for the companies he drove for were made redundant. I remember growing up constantly, my family was chucked into uncertainty because my father, who was the main breadwinner, was suddenly told, you don't have a job anymore, we're making cuts, and they were replacing the UK-born workforce with a cheaper foreign workforce. Now, under those circumstances, you can imagine why a lot of people then don't want to train to be lorry drivers, because they're not being paid enough, and when they were in those professions, they were being replaced. Then all of a sudden, when we left the EU, suddenly, and those people went back home to Eastern Europe, we find we've got a shortage. So I actually think that, you know, this is a correction that needs to take place, but that is my personal opinion on what's gone on in a lot of our trades. I know various builders and plumbers and electricians. When I was at school, I was told, if you want to earn good money, go into the trades. There's a shortage of workers, go into the trades, you'll make great money. Then all of a sudden, builders I know from Gloucester and roofers suddenly couldn't get a job because they were being undercut in the marketplace. So I think we've kind of, rather than blame British people for being lazy, I think we need to blame successive government politics of taking British workers for granted, pummeling them down into a position of defeat.
Regardless of that, Alex, there's still vacancies out there. Lorry drivers aren't even on the work permit list. So you can't recruit a lorry driver from abroad anymore via a work permit. They're not on the list, and yet we still have a shortage. And remember, if you're calling someone over on a work permit, you have to pay them the UK equivalent of that salary. You can't cut the corner. You can't say, right, I'm going to recruit a foreign lorry driver, let's just say,
but it compresses the wages. It compresses the wages in a marketplace of work.
What we need to do is understand why there is a skill shortage. You're right. Maybe wages do need to go up, but the governments always look out for British businesses, whether it's not requiring to pay tax by still having them set up offshore in the name of big companies and big conglomerates, or whether it's keeping the taxes down. And recently, you can see the uproar about employers having to pay higher NI. And how that's put their noses out of joint, and the billionaires requiring, well, hold on, if you've got a business in the UK, how about starting off to pay some tax in here? Oh, we're going to leave. This is how patriotic these businesses are. They're thinking of leaving rather than paying tax. So the fact is, businesses will always look out for themselves and always look.
Of course. Look, businesses by nature are psychopathic. They treat humans as units, not as emotional creatures with agency. We know that, and we can go into economics and the Laffer curve of what happens with too much of a tax burden. But that's a conversation for another day. We're here to talk about migration. Let's talk now about the one big arrest yesterday. Sir Keir Starmer was so proud of himself that 3 different forces got together to make this arrest of a 44-year-old who was part of the procurement or provision of small dinghies, that he held a press conference. I'm pretty sure that these arrests have been going on for a number of years. Perhaps we should celebrate this. Perhaps this is suddenly a sort of crack in the dam when it comes to people trafficking. But one thing that is interesting here, I think, is very often people who might have intelligence or information regarding people traffickers and the gangs and the cartels that actually do this sort of stuff must be the people getting into boats. They must have phone numbers on their phones. They must be able to say to the UK authorities who recruited them, who they gave money to, who was sending them text message instructions on which beach to turn up at what time. Do you know from your work as an immigration lawyer whether this actually ends up playing a part of whether or not people can claim so-called asylum here on condition of, I don't know, giving the UK authorities relevant information?
No, I don't think that has anything to do with asylum at all. There's no extra advantage given if you decide to grass up another criminal, let's just say, or a criminal in that respect. Your asylum claim is considered solely on the fact of, are you at risk of persecution if you're sent back to the country from which you're claiming asylum from? So that's what asylum is. However, the intel is collected and it's used and it's shared. And when the Smash the Gangs comes into it, the whole logo comes in and the whole plan comes into it, it's based on that intel. Now, what we've got to see here is this arrest, is this a thread, like you pull a thread on a sweater or a jumper, and is this going to unravel all of the gangs here? I suspect probably not. This is just one part of the puzzle. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. First of all, you have to break up the business model, not just by catching these people, but also by offering people an alternative. So if one gang is just replaced by another, that's not good enough. We have to offer alternatives to people whereby they think, I don't need a gang to go and claim asylum. So we have to look at some sort of processing centre or a centre to claim asylum abroad.
Well, I mean, that's nice, but I just don't...
That forms part of it. That's not the only thing. There's plenty of other stuff that needs to be done. Remember, gangs operate not just in France and in Europe, Alex, they operate in the UK.
I agree. And the problem we have is having to deal with agencies in other countries. Germany, for instance, where they've got 20 warehouses in Essen alone where these boats are being kept, don't allow surveillance under their constitution because of, pretty dark things that happened in the past. So I think it's a bit like trying to beat the drugs gangs. It's incredibly difficult to do. And, I don't understand why Britain has to be the bleeding heart and taking anyone from any country that's ruined itself. I don't get why that's suddenly a thing. I mean, look, I agree that when people are in desperate need, claiming asylum is a good and humane thing to do, but I do worry about the idea of setting up processing in every single country that claims it has, that we could claim treats its people badly, because that's pretty much 3/4 of the rest of the world. Let's speak now to Mike, who is in Manchester. Mike, I understand that you are a trucker. Good man.
I am a trucker. He's talking out the top of his head. I'm telling him straight, he's talking out the top of his head. Where do you have to go in this country, right, when you drive a truck, right, you're doing 60-plus hours a week, and you're earning 35 to 40 grand on it, yeah? Tell me again how they're not getting paid enough.
Yeah, have you found in your line of work, how long have you been a trucker, Mike?
I've been a trucker for 31 years.
Right.
Now, bearing in mind, I'm not one of the guys who's on 30 grand a year. I make a downside more than that because I've been doing it a lot longer and I've got more contacts. But you've got lads coming into this industry, 18 years of age, passing the test, class 1. They can't get a job because of insurance till they're 25. This is the problem. This guy hasn't got a clue what he's talking about. He needs to educate himself.
But I just want to ask, have you been a trucker for 30 years? Did you find things a bit like, have you seen people in the job, like my dad experienced, where all of a sudden wages were compressed, that foreign workers were just actually far more appetising to the big companies than the native-born population?
I know of agencies, and a few years ago, they were actively going over to Poland, they were going over to Romania, Hungary. They were buying houses in my local area where I live and putting them up 8 to 9 drivers in a house and charging them rent for it and paying them a lower wage than they were paying everybody else.
Right.
So it has gone on, and I'll guarantee you it probably is still going on.
I wouldn't be surprised. And just before I let you go, Mike, I just want to know how your COVID was, because this is the other thing. We all stood on our doorsteps, didn't we, bashing pans for the NHS. Meanwhile, all the people driving lorries are putting food on supermarket shelves, delivering medicines to pharmacies, making sure that people who wanted their Amazon deliveries, you know, they could order something online so they didn't have to leave the house and it magically emerged on their doorstep. I thought the way we treated lorry drivers was pretty appalling. We shut down service stations. How on earth were they supposed to eat or drink or go to the loo?
It was disgusting how they were treated. Disgusting. The place where I worked at, you weren't even allowed to talk to your colleagues. There was 1,000 people working there when I was during COVID. You weren't even allowed to sit with them and talk to them. But you could jump in a truck and go and deliver the food for the people.
Yeah, do you know what? Let's go back to you, Harjap. Now, look, Mike, like I said, it's close to my heart, this stuff. People who don't work in these professions think that there are all sorts of manners and mechanisms and that British people are lazy and don't want to do those jobs. Hearing what I said about what my dad experienced, listening to Mike there, is it any wonder?
This is the nature of business, like you said, that businesses don't want to pay the extra buck. That's not fault of the migrant who's coming over, is it? That's the fault of the business.
Right, well, I agree with that, but it's not the fault of lazy Brits who don't want to do jobs either, is it?
Yeah, but it's not just one industry, is it? If you have a look. What about taxi drivers? How come all the Uber drivers in London are pretty much migrants? What about security guards? In your building, where you're sat, your security guards are migrants. I know because I come there to do interviews, right? Why can't you get British security guards? Are you trying to tell me now British people don't want to do these jobs?
Look, I know a lot of my security guards, and actually, I don't think they're what you would technically classify as migrants because they're from families who've been here for multiple generations.
I know that.
I don't think you should be judging people by the colour of their skin right now.
Alex, even the makeup artist, when I come to TalkTV Towers, is a migrant. You know that. I know that.
We've got a couple of Australians. We've got some Brits.
Right. So why can't British people do these jobs? Surely these jobs...
They do those jobs. You're talking about London, Harjap. London, 60% of the population are foreign-born. You want to go out to, I don't know, chipping Sodbury, and you probably won't find as many people there.
You can't blame the migrants for this.
Who's blaming migrants?
You cannot blame immigration. Immigrants are just filling the need for jobs.
Oh, Harjap, look, you know...
There are vacancies that are being filled by migrants, and if British people are trained, and the whole training...
Good. Let's look after our own, shall we? That's what I'm saying.
Let's incentivise the British people. Right, so that starts by getting a hold of businesses.
I agree with that. It also starts
pay your taxes, invest in staff, and then...
Pay him properly.
Project.
Treat him well.
No government has bothered about this for the last 30 years.
I agree with that as well. Do you know, finally, we've ended this conversation on something that we can definitely shake hands on and say, absolutely. It's time we looked after our working classes in this country. It sickens me. Indeed. Right, Harjap there. Thank you ever so much for that.